Hey, well, good morning. Welcome back to another Home Group Sunday here at the Corners Chapel. My name is Chase. I serve as the lead pastor. And if you just happen to somehow stumble on this video, we are a church plant that meets in Macedonia, Ohio at the Nordonia High School. Normally we meet at the Nordonia High School. We're incredibly privileged to work with the administration there. And I talk to church planters from all over the country that would love to be in their local high schools, and the high school isn't welcoming to have them in, but we are blessed to be able to partner with the high school in Nordonia. However, there's some Sundays where we can't be there, whether they have different events or like this week, the winter play. And so when we can't be there on Sunday morning, we try and get creative. And one of the ways that we get creative is by having a home group Sunday like we're doing right now. So we're so glad that you decided to join us this morning. We try and do something like this about once every 2 to 3 months when we're unable to be at the high school. So we're glad to be able to do this. And actually, I say this pretty much every time that we have an online service like this, but when our church officially started in the end of August in 2020, this is how we had our services. We didn't have anywhere to meet yet, and so we recorded the services, and actually we live streamed them, and then we would meet in different groups around the community as a way to begin to build the church. And so the Lord was gracious to us then, and so in many ways these types of services are us returning to our roots. So I'm glad to be able to still share a message with you through the wonders of technology. One thing really quick before we dive in, some of you may have caught on that we started calling this Home Group Sunday instead of Small Group Sunday. That was not a mistake. I didn't just get mixed up with my words. We're trying to get on the same page with the language that we used, and many of us came from different backgrounds, and we had small groups and home groups, maybe community groups. I've heard churches that call them squad groups or cell groups or something like that. And so we here at the Corners want to officially call these types of groups our home groups, and I'll explain why towards the end of this message. So we're going to stick with home groups. Again, I'll explain why at the end. But if you have a Bible, go ahead and open to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 4 is where we're going to start with our time together. But before we dive in, one of the things that I love about these digital services is the opportunity to bring in faces from around the country or even around the world. And so before we get started, I want to throw it over to a friend of our church. He's preached here digitally. He's preached here in person when we were at the YMCA, and that's Pastor Trey Van Camp. He's going to read from the book of Psalms, although we will start in the book of Mark. So I'm going to throw it over to Pastor Trey.
Good morning, Corners Chapel. Happy Home Group Sunday. It's been a couple years since I've been with you, but my name is Trey Van Camp. I'm a pastor of Passion Creek Church out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I have the privilege to read Psalm 29, 1 through 4, and verses 10 through 11 for you. Psalm 29, starting in verse 1, says, "Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is above the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord above the vast water. The voice of the Lord in power. The voice of the Lord in splendor. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned, King forever. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses his people with peace." Grace and peace to you guys.
Thanks, Pastor Trey. And actually, again, with the wonders of technology, obviously this is pre-recorded. And so Lord willing, at the time that you guys are watching this in your groups, I will be down in Queen Creek, Arizona, right outside Phoenix, with Passion Creek Church and sharing this message to the congregation that Pastor Trey pastors. And so please pray for me as I'm preaching down there while you guys are watching this. As for now, let me pray for our time together this morning and as we dive into the Word, and then we'll begin. Father, thank you again for technology, for allowing us to have this service. Lord, I pray that you will speak through me, that you will allow me to communicate clearly. May I become less, may you become greater. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, if you were with us in church last week, or if you went back and listened to the sermon from last week, we kicked off our Advent series, and we're calling our Advent series, Emmanuel, God is with us. And when we saw last week how the word Emmanuel, it actually means God is with us. And last week we really did a flyover of the entire Bible, right? And we saw how from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation, all of it points either forward to what we call the first Advent, or it points backwards. And so we saw the Old Testament, all of the Old Testament is all pointing forward, pointing towards Jesus' first arrival. And so it can be read and understood in light of the first coming of Jesus. But then the rest of the New Testament, the letters from Acts all the way through Revelation, they both point back to Jesus' first coming as well as pointing forward to his second coming. But all of history thus far is really centered around one moment when one man split history. And the reason we say he split history is because he wasn't just a man, but because he was fully God and fully man. And we call that the incarnation. Right? God became man, and we talked about the significance about that and how it's more important than we can possibly imagine. And I said last week that in this series, the main thing that I want you to realize in this whole series that we're calling our Advent series, the main thing that I want you to get out of this Christmas season, or as we build towards it, the Advent season, is that Christmas is so much more than just about the fun songs in the store. So much more than just about the nostalgic memories from our past, or it's even way more than just about creating fun moments for our children, right? All of that is great, that's fun, but if that's where our priorities are, then we're missing out on the fact that this season that we're in is actually a commemoration of the most important season in the history of the world. We might be tempted to say, wait, isn't that Easter? Right? Isn't the Easter season the most important, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus? Well, yes, but we can't disconnect the two. Right? Easter happened only because God, the sovereign God, the creator of the earth, took on human flesh. And so while this series is relatively short, what I want to do this week and the next couple weeks when we're back at the high school is simply take a few moments to look at some stories in the Bible, maybe even some familiar stories where people seem to glimpse the significance of what all of this really means. Where they seem to realize, hey, this is bigger than what we can possibly articulate or really understand what's going on. And can I be completely honest for just a second? I guess this is pre-recorded, so you can't answer or stop me. But I'm probably not supposed to say this as a pastor, but I really struggle during Christmas and Easter season. Okay, I've talked to a lot of other pastors, and I think I might be in the minority here, but if I'm being honest, these are two of the hardest parts of the year for me, and here's why. We're supposed to be focused on the fact that God, right? God, the scripture says that he dwells in unapproachable light. Like, what does that even mean? The God who breathed life into us, the God who spoke existence into existence. He became man. But that focus seems to take a back seat in so many of our lives. Like, even if we know that that's true internally, we often appear externally more concerned with what we put on the Christmas tree, or, what cozy Hallmark movies we want to watch. And please don't hear me slamming any of that stuff. That's all fun, but that should come second. See, every store that I go into, every restaurant, every commercial wants to take our attention from the greatest truth ever and focus on the temporary and the nostalgic and the holly jolly Christmas aspect of the season. And let me just say, there is no real power in all of that at all. Don't even get me started about the Easter bunny during Easter season. But during these seasons, I often find myself torn between two worlds. Right? I find myself torn, and I don't want to say, again, that the other stuff is bad. By the time that this video comes out, at our house, we'll probably would have put up our lights in our house and all on the roof, and my wife would have watched 37 Hallmark Christmas movies, and we would have probably collectively as a family drank 3 gallons of hot chocolate. So there's a place for all of that. I enjoy all of that. But the question I want us to wrestle with is, how does any of that actually help us in our day-to-day life? Like, if we as a church are supposed to have the answer to people's brokenness. We're supposed to be ambassadors of the goodness of God, the ambassadors of the good news that brings hope to the hopeless and help to a dying world. That's not found in just the Christmas activities that we see in the stores, right? That there's no lasting peace that comes with the superficial holiday aspects of Christmas. So, where do we find true peace? Right? Lasting peace. Where do we find lasting peace in both this season and in every season of our life? That's what I want to answer today. But here's what I want you to know, and this is our main point for today, the overarching main point. When we marvel at the incomprehensible reality of the incarnation, we can find true peace and rest in every area of our life. Okay, so the more we unpack the incomprehensible, the more that we can find true peace and rest in every area of our life. And so I want to break that down this morning. And so to do that, let me just give you my 3 points ahead of time, and then we'll break them down. Here they are. Number 1, we can have peace because of the power of Jesus. Number 2, we can have peace because of the presence of Jesus. And then number 3, we can have peace because of the purpose of Jesus. We can have peace because of the power of Jesus. We can have peace because of the presence of Jesus. And we can have peace because of the purpose of Jesus. Those are our 3 main points, and that's our outline for today. And so what I want to do to unpack these truths is I want to look at 2 stories from the life of Jesus, both fairly well-known stories if you grew up in church. And we can find the first one in the book of Mark chapter 4, and it's Jesus calming the storm. Jesus calming the storm. And what I want to show in both of these stories that we're going to look at is that there are principles that we can take from and apply these to our lives. But we have to be careful when we approach these stories not to over-allegorize these stories. Because these stories are meant first and foremost to teach us about Jesus. Okay, so let me read the first one, Mark chapter 4. I'm going to read starting in verse 35, and then we'll break it down. Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. It says, on that day, when evening had come, okay, so just to set the context, here in the book of Mark chapter 4, Jesus had just dropped a whole bunch of parables on the people. He's teaching, and here's what he says. After he teaches a bunch of parables, he says, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with him in a boat, just as he was. Now, again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on every single word here, but I think it's interesting that Mark says that they took Jesus in the boat just as he was. Okay? Now we know that there's no careless words in Scripture. And so I think what Mark is doing here is he's making a note. He's saying, hey, Jesus didn't do something extra special to prepare for this, right? If you know what's coming in the story, you know that it's absolutely crazy. And so Mark is like, hey, this is just normal Jesus. Okay, he just taught. He's exhausted. He didn't make a bunch of preparations to try and shock everybody. No, this was normal Jesus. I think Mark is focusing on the humanity of Jesus here. But then he says, in verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, talking about Jesus, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? There's a lot we could unpack in that verse. They didn't say, Teacher, help us. No, they said, do you not care about us? Which is why, verse 39 says, and Jesus, he awoke, and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Remarkable. We'll come right back to that. But then he says, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Okay, before we break this story down, just let that sink in, okay? Imagine this is your first time hearing this story. See, many of us have heard this story so much, maybe from the time that we were in our Corners kids age, and so we say, okay, yeah, I get it. Jesus, he made the wave stop. I get it. But picture that you're actually on that boat. Okay, you've never heard this story before. You're living this. You're on the lake. These are professional sailors, a whole bunch of them, and they're terrified, which means this storm is huge. Okay, this isn't just like, hey, these guys have never been out on the water and so they're a little scared. No, these were professional fishermen, And I said again, there's lessons that we can learn about ourselves from this, that Jesus is with us in the storms, and we're going to get there in a second. But here, especially with stories that we're really familiar with, it's important that we don't jump straight to trying to apply this to us. In other words, we don't want to jump straight to making this a metaphor or an allegory for us, because if we do that, and there's a time to do that, but if we do that initially, then we can miss the main point. Okay, let me just say it plainly. If we read this and we simply walk away from it with the understanding that Jesus is with us in the storms of our life and that he can make our storms go away, that's true and that's comforting, but we're not understanding the why behind it. And the reason why it's important for us to understand the why is because when we go through the storms of life, we need a foundation that's not just simply rooted in trendy or epigrammatic comfort sayings. We have to understand the why. Like what is true about Jesus that makes the fact that he can comfort us in the storm a reality. When we approach the text like that, trying to understand the why, then we see that the point of this story is actually to point us to the identity of Jesus. Okay, that's why the last verse in this story, they're like, who is this guy? Right? They're like, we've seen him do miracles. We've seen him talk in riddles. We've seen him show up against the religious authorities. But who is this guy? Like the winds listen to him. Okay, so let's look at the story a little closer. Jesus is on the sea. Okay, he's on the Sea of Galilee. This is a real sea, and it's a real story. Actually, on the screen, you should see a picture of when my wife and I went to Israel, and we had the privilege of going out on the Sea of Galilee. I can't remember if I showed this picture before, but there I am with my Cleveland Browns Hebrew shirt. I even blew the shofar on the edge of the boat, see if the rapture would start, but it didn't happen. But Jesus is out on the sea. It's a real sea. But it's nighttime here, and here's what you need to know about the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is known, even to this day, for sudden storms, especially at night. Okay, it's in a valley, and so the winds come down and the temperature changes, and there's all kinds of reasons why there's storms. But the big point of this story, again, is not the storm itself. Okay, I think sometimes we can spend time trying to dissect and draw meaning from the type of storm or the wording that Jesus used to calm the storm, and maybe there's merit there, but the point is that Jesus looked at a storm and told the storm to stop, and the storm stopped. Okay, now follow me here. I gained a lot when studying this from theologian Mike Winger. And his deep dive into this particular story. And as he was unpacking this, he said that it's important for us to understand the Jewish way of thinking about the weather at this time, the weather and the sea. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, again, I'm standing on the shoulders of Mike Winger and many other biblical commentators here. But if you look at the book of Psalms, really the whole Old Testament, but primarily in the Psalms, there's so many examples when the psalmist or the Old Testament writer is re-emphasizing that God alone, not just any God, but Yahweh God, the covenant God of Israel, that he's the only one that can control the sea, and that he's the only one that can control the weather. Let me read Psalm 65, verses 1 through 8. The psalmist says, "By awesome deeds you answer us with righteousness, O God of our salvation, the hope of all the ends of the earth, and of the farthest seas, the one who by his strength established the mountains." Okay, so the psalmist is saying God created everything. Verse 7, talking about God, "who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples, so that those who dwell at the ends of the earth are in awe of your signs. You make going out of the morning and the evening to shout for joy." Okay, so again, the psalmist is saying God is in control of all. God is the only one who's in control of all. And as a result, all the ends of the earth should be in awe of his majesty. Psalm 89. I'm just going to read verse 8 through 9. "O Lord, Yahweh, O Yahweh, God of hosts, who is mighty as you are?" He's asking that question. Who is as mighty as you are, God? "With your faithfulness all around you, you rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them." Okay? Now there's a lot of other Psalms we could look at, even outside of Psalms, the book of Job, Elijah with his battle with the other false prophets. Like Elijah didn't control the weather. No, he had to pray to God, and then God was the one who made it rain. Side note, this is why one of the things that drives me crazy is when people say Moses parted the Red Sea. No, any Old Testament believer would lose their mind at that. It wasn't Moses, it was God who parted the sea through Moses. He used Moses, but God alone was in control of all. Okay, again, there's a lot more that we could look at there, but check this out. Psalm 107. I love the Psalms just because they cover every part of life, and we can find a psalm for whatever we're going through, loss, joy, fear, whatever. But the best part of the book of Psalms is that, like the rest of the Old Testament, the Psalms point to Jesus. And as you read through the Psalms, you start to see these pictures, and you're like, that sounds a lot like Jesus. And so let me read Psalm 107. In fact, if you have a Bible, it's worth turning towards. Psalm 107, and I'm just going to read verse 23 through 31. And I want you to listen to this psalm with the story that we read in Mark as the backdrop. Okay, Psalm 107, verse 23. It says this: "Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of Yahweh, his wondrous work in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end." Here we go, verse 28. "Then they cried to Yahweh in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank Yahweh for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man." What does that sound like? Sounds a lot like what Jesus just did, right? And so the disciples, as they're on the sea, and they would have known the Old Testament, they're like, man, this is not just a man. And that's why, going back to the Mark passage, we see that when the sea was raging, they were afraid. It simply says they were afraid, and then now it says they feared a great fear. I don't know if you noticed that. Like they're more afraid after Jesus calms the storm, because they're starting to realize this is not just a man. Right? There's something about this man here. They realize that even the waves, even the sea obeys him. So what can we take away from this today? Well, this is the why behind the application that's so often drawn from this, right? Jesus, yes, he can calm the storms of our life, and that should bring us peace, and we should talk about that. I don't want to downplay that. But the reason he can calm the storms of our life is because of his power. And the disciples realized this. They realized in this moment that God was actually with them. Right? That this wasn't just someone who was close to God. Right? And they're starting to realize this. They haven't realized it fully yet, but they're starting to realize there's something more to this man than meets the eye. Right? He didn't have to pray to God in this moment. No, he just looked at the water and said, "Stop." And it stopped. Okay, so that's incredible. And that realization, the emphasis on the fact that God is that powerful, that he's not subject to the laws of nature because he created the laws of nature, that realization should bring with it peace and even reverence, even a holy fear. Right? That's that fear, the word that it says they feared a great fear. It's talking about reverence. Do we have a holy reverence for God? Or do we just have a casual faith? Or do we fear him? Because with a holy reverence, with a righteous fear of our Creator should come peace. Not the kind of fear that's like, oh no, is God going to strike me dead in the moment? But the kind of fear that says, this God is creator of everything. He created me. That should come with it. That understanding should bring with it a righteous fear. And with that righteous fear should come peace. Why should we feel peace? Well, next, because he's also present. He's powerful, but he's present and he cares about us. And so to highlight that, let me jump over to our second story. So jump to Mark chapter 6. We saw Jesus calm the storm. And then now in Mark chapter 6, we're going to see when Jesus walked on water. right? If we're being honest, all of us tried that as a kid, right? We're in the pool. We try to see if we can run fast enough to walk on water. No, maybe that was just me. But no one can do that. Only Jesus can do that because, again, he's outside of the laws of creation because it's his creation. Verse 45. Immediately. This is Mark chapter 6. Mark loves the word. That's his favorite word. Immediately. He made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethesda while he dismissed the crowd. We're not going to dwell long on the context, but Jesus had just finished the feeding of the 5,000. And so he dismisses the crowd. And it says, and after he had taken leave of them, he went on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they saw him and they were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves. Again, this is from the feeding of the 5,000, but their hearts were hardened. Okay, so what do we see here? Another just great display of Jesus's power. He's walking on the water. He's doing the impossible. And then after this, he goes and does a bunch of miracles. So again, Jesus has the power over all of creation. But there's something in here that we can miss if we just read through this quickly. Because I think there's an important lesson here about God, and it shows up in verse 46. Verse 48, but let's start in verse 46. Jesus, he leaves the crowd. He goes up to the mountain to pray. It's a whole nother sermon. The prayer life of Jesus, like God himself in human flesh, he prayed. So if God prays and he even prays for us, then why don't we pray as much as we should? I'm preaching to myself. And so Jesus is up on the mountain. He's praying. And then it says in verse 48, that it was the fourth watch of the night. Okay, so this is Roman clock, and so for us that would have been between 3 and 6 a.m. So it's late, it's the middle of the night. And so catch this. I wasn't going to stop there, but let me just say, the reason why I think it's important for us to realize that it was the middle of the night is because sometimes people will try and twist this passage and say, oh, and this is something that a lot of scholars actually say that don't trust the inerrancy of the Bible or try to write out miracles from the Bible. They'll say it must have been a mirage, right? The disciples just saw a mirage and they thought Jesus was walking on the water, but he wasn't really walking on the water. That's ridiculous for a lot of reasons. One, again, these were professional fishermen. They would have known what was a mirage and what wasn't, but it's the middle of the night. Okay, they're not seeing mirages between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. It's late. It's the middle of the night. And so catch this, about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and it says he meant to pass by them. Okay, this is one of my favorite Easter eggs in the entire Bible. This is incredible. We don't have time to walk through the whole book of Mark, so you're going to have to trust me here. But this whole book of Mark is building a case for the deity of Jesus. Okay, from Mark 1, verse 1, he's like, hey, this Jesus guy, he's the one that we've been waiting for all the way since the book of Genesis. And oh, by the way, he's God. Like, this is what Mark is building towards. Mark's showing that he's forgiving people's sins. He's casting out demons. And he shows that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He showed earlier, we just saw that he controls the winds and the waves. And so all through the book, Mark is building his case to show that Jesus is God. And just like there's Old Testament prophetic imagery of God and that God alone can calm the seas, check this out. Okay, this verse should be on the screen. Job chapter 9, verse 7 and 8. Seems like an obscure verse, but Job is basically talking about the majesty of God, and here's what he says. Who commands the sun, and it does not rise? Who seals up the stars? Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Okay, you say, big deal. Right? We've already established that God alone controls the seas. We already established that. Check this out. Okay, this phrase that God alone tramples the waves of the seas, in the Greek translation of the book of Job, The phrase there is peripaton epithalasis. Peripaton epithalasis. You say, so what? I don't care about that. Why does that matter? Well, in Mark's gospel, when he says in verse 48 that Jesus was walking on the water, he uses that exact same phrase, peripaton epithalasis. Yeah, now you might think, okay, interesting coincidence. But again, what is Mark doing? The whole book, Mark is building he's trying to make a case for the deity of Jesus. He's trying to build this case to show that Jesus is God. If that's not enough proof, then let me show you this. In the same passage in Job, just 2 verses later, we see this little verse, verse 11. Behold, talking about God, he passes by me and I see him not. He moves on, but I do not perceive him. What is going on? What is Job talking about? Well, follow me here. We're going to get into the weeds for just a second, but I think that this is important and this will springboard us to our final point. We've seen Jesus' power, but check this out. Okay? In the Old Testament, when God says or when we see that God would pass by people, this was God's way of revealing his glory to them, but he did so at a distance. Right? The biggest example of this was with Moses. Right? We hinted at this last week. And in fact, okay, let me turn there. Exodus chapter 33, and I believe it's verse 18. Okay, Exodus chapter 33, verse 18. This might seem like a sidetrack, but trust me, it's not. Okay, so remember, this is after the people had rebelled. Moses had given them the 10 Commandments, or he started to give them the 10 Commandments, but he walked down the mountain. People were wilding out down at the bottom of the mountain, and so he goes back up, and he's like, got us to give him the law again. And look at what it says, verse 18. Moses is talking to God. He says, please show me your glory. He said, I will make, and this is what God says, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, Yahweh, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But, Moses says, God, show me who you are. And God says, but you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And Yahweh said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand in the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Okay, so God says to Moses, hey, I'm going to show you my glory, but you're only going to be able to see me pass by. You're not even going to be able to see me as I pass by. I'm going to cover your eyes, and then you're going to see my backside. Verse 4 of chapter 34. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone. So he cuts the new 10 Commandments. Verse 6, here we go. Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head towards the earth and worshiped. Okay, what does this have to do with what we just saw? Okay, so again, follow me. We often think of this story of Jesus walking on the water as like, hey, he was just a little late to the boat. Like, he noticed they were struggling, and so he said, hey, I'm going to go out and help them. But we completely skip over this phrase that says he meant to pass by them. And what Mark is trying to get us to see is that he meant to pass by the boat. Now let me read just one more thing, and then I'll bring this out of the weeds. This is from theologian Sam Storms, who's a theologian down in Oklahoma. He says this, in saying that Jesus walked upon the water and meant to pass by the disciples, Mark isn't saying that he wanted to sneak past them unnoticed, because that's the other thing you could think, like maybe he just wanted to get to the other side before them. He was trying to beat them. No, it says he intended to be revealed. He intended to be disclosed in the most marvelous and glorious way as the very God who, quote, passed by, end quote, Moses in Exodus and was made known as the one true God, the great and majestic creator of all mankind. Okay, so what we see here in the fact that Jesus wants to pass by the boat is a direct tie to the Old Testament. That's not enough. One more part. Do you remember, we won't turn there, but do you remember what God said to Moses? When Moses is like, God, if I go back to Egypt and I try and tell Pharaoh to let my people go, like let your people go, he's going to be like, who sent you? Like, who should I say? What's your name? What does God say? God says, tell them, I am sent you. God says, tell them that the I am sent you. Okay, I got to calm down. This phrase just gets me so hyped because God reveals himself as simply, I just am. Okay, if you study philosophy, you'll learn about René Descartes and his famous saying, I think, therefore I am. In other words, he's saying, the fact that I can form a logical thought proves my existence. But what is God saying? God's simply saying, my existence proves my existence. I am that I am. But catch this, back to Mark, Jesus is walking on the water. Like, again, that's wild. He's above all. He's the creator of all. He's walking on the water that he made. And the people are afraid. But this isn't just a reverence fear. They think that they saw a ghost, and so they're scared. But look at verse 50. It says, but immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I. I won't bore you with the construction of the Greek, but here's what I want you to know. The Greek behind the English, it is I, could easily be rendered, I am. This is what it's the same Greek layout that he's saying in the book of John with all the I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the door. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's constantly saying, when God revealed himself in the Old Testament as the I am, that's me. But then verse 51, and this is incredible. This is what we miss if we just turn this into an allegory and say Jesus can walk on the messy waters of our life. You know, you can too, like Peter in the Matthew account. If there's truth to all of that, I don't want to say that we can't draw those kinds of truths. But look at this. Jesus wants to show them his glory. He's proving his power. And then look at verse 51. He says, I am. Don't be afraid. And then verse 51, it says, and he got into the boat with them. Brothers and sisters, this verse just wrecked me in my preparation as I was preparing this, because this is why I get so frustrated with and disheartened with the commercialization and the devaluation and the hallmarkization, if that's a word, of Christmas. Because what this verse shows us is that the God of the universe didn't just come down to earth to flex his power on us, but he came to offer us his presence. See, again, in the Old Testament, because of man's sin, there was no direct access to God. People had to go through a priest, and even Moses, the great Moses, couldn't bear to see the glory of God on display or it would kill him. And so what did God do? Did God say, forget it? Just either try harder or I'm out. I'm done with you guys. No, he came down to us. I think this is what Charles Wesley so brilliantly captures in his hymn when he says this. He says, veiled in flesh, the Godhead see. What does that mean? It means look at Jesus and you see God hidden in human flesh. God is in the person of Jesus. Then he says, hail the incarnate deity. Deity, of course, is talking about God himself. Incarnate means he's enfleshed. And then look at these next two lines. He was pleased as man with men in flesh to dwell. Jesus is our Emmanuel. See, there's that word again, Emmanuel. God is with us. Jesus, our God, is with us. We know who God is because of the person of Jesus. We know what God is like because of Jesus. And we know that because of what we see in Jesus, that God is not just a God who remains distant, but actually wants to get into the boat with us. He became one of us, which is why I think Wesley can't help but say in the next line, hark the herald angels sing. Glory to the innocent, harmless, peaceful, silent Jesus. No. Glory to the newborn King. Friends, do we think of this when we hear Christmas hymns? There's more theology in the stores and in the commercials. There's more Christology during this season all around us, and we don't even think about it. Well, we're not thinking about the fact that the creator of the world came down to us, that when Jesus ate and drank and nursed with his mother, and when he scraped his knee and when he grew taller, that all of that was happening in a way that he designed the world to work. And that God who's all powerful is ever personal by giving us his presence. But why? Why? Well, this leads to our final point. Our first point is that we can have peace in this crazy world because of Jesus' power. Like, he controls all, so we can trust him. Second point, we can have peace because of his presence, that he's with us. But hear me. True peace comes from understanding his purpose. Because, again, both of these stories, they kind of end in a weird way, don't they? But both of them. Like, the first one ends with them saying, who is this guy? Like, the winds listen to him, but what is going on? And then the second story, they still don't fully understand it. But check this out. This is the last quote that I'll read. This is from Edward James' commentary on Mark. He's talking about what Jesus says when Jesus says, "It is I," or "I am." This quote should be on the screen. It says, "It is a divine epiphany." So Jesus' phrase, it is I, or "I am." This is a divine epiphany in answer to their earlier bafflement when he calmed the storm. Who is this? So he's saying, Jesus is answering the question from chapter 4. They said, who's this? And Jesus says, it's me, I am. In this respect, Mark's Christology is no less sublime than is John's. Again, although John has Jesus declaring that he is the Son of God, whereas Mark has him showing that he is the Son of God, in Mark, one must, don't miss this, in Mark, one must, like the disciples, be in the boat with Jesus and enter into the drama in order to behold who Jesus is. The one who calmed the storms is the one who now appears in the storm, the I am of God. What does this mean? What's he saying? Well, here it is. What he's saying is that in order for us to truly grasp the significance of this, in order for us to really understand the purpose of Jesus, to understand the plan of Jesus, to understand the purpose of Jesus, we have to be in the boat with Jesus. As a side note, some commentators have said maybe this is why the part of Peter walking on the water isn't included in Mark's gospel. Right? There's other lessons that we can learn from Peter walking on the water, and that's in Matthew's account in Matthew 14, but Mark just skips right over that. Some commentators point to the fact that Mark he's just so hyper fixated on showing the divinity of Jesus through Jesus' actions and through all of these Old Testament callbacks that he didn't want to add anything as a distraction. Okay, so this is not an oversight. This is not a mistake in the Bible that Peter's not mentioned. But Mark is showing us that what Jesus came to do is to save. Mark's trying to get us as the readers to see what the disciples didn't get yet. Right? They would get there. Even Judas at the end kind of gets it. That's why he does what he does. But what Mark is showing us is that God himself was with them. And the lesson for us from that is that God is with us today. Because as the Gospels show us later, the newborn king was born to die. But it was through his death that we could have life, because he didn't stay dead. God himself took on flesh. He became one of us so that we could become like him. To quote Athanasius, God became man so that men could live like God. Not in the sense that we control the winds and the waves, or we're all knowing, or not saying that we have the divine attributes of God, but we can be seen as positionally holy by God. And Mark, throughout the gospel, is showing us the power of Jesus on display, that he commands and controls all, the presence of Jesus, that God is not just distant. And through it all, he's showing us the purpose of Jesus, that God became man so that regardless of what happens in life to us, if we are in him, then we will one day live and rule and reign with him forever. Which brings us back to our overarching point. When we marvel at the incomprehensible reality of the incarnation, when we just let our minds focus on all of this, then we can find true peace and rest in every area of our life. And so let me ask, is this your primary frame of reference or your primary framing of your mind when it comes to Christmas? I'm not saying we can't enjoy the songs. I'm not saying we can't enjoy the presents and the lights, even the nostalgic aspects. I love the claymation Rudolph and the Polar Express and Lord of the Rings. Those are my three favorite Christmas movies. If you want to say Lord of the Rings not a Christmas movie, that's a whole nother message. But no, I love Christmas morning. Right? I love the gifts. I love seeing my kids' faces light up when we find out together what I got them. But no, for real, none of that, as fun as it is, none of that will get us through the storms of our lives. And so here's where the allegory comes in, right? We will go through storms in our lives, all of us. It's been said that over and over that all of us either are coming out of a storm, we're in the middle of a storm, or we will be going into a storm. Okay, so all of us have storms in our life, but friends, let's not jump straight to the allegory so much so that we miss the reason that we can have hope in the storms, and we miss that the reason is because of the power and the presence and the purpose of a child who was born to be a king. I want to end with a song, and then I'll come back and give a few closing thoughts and instructions, but I want you to listen to the words of this song. This is not meant to be sung in your home groups, but really focus on the words as our music team sings these songs. And then I'll come back and give some closing thoughts and instructions.
So I'll just start it, right? Yep. Or you could do it like in the video and say, take two.
Gloria
The Lord the worlds obeyed, would stumble as he learned to walk upon the ground which he had made. That line just gets me every time because it's just a clear reminder that Jesus, when he was on the earth and now, is fully God and fully man. See, we have to understand that if we're going to put our faith in him. So I'm going to pray, and then I'll give some instructions for your groups. I'll give our key takeaway and action step. But I want to pray primarily for any of us that don't know that truth, or that we can't say with confidence that we've put our hope and our faith in Jesus. If that's you and you don't know if you've put your hope and your faith in Jesus, would you pray this prayer with me? Father, thank you for your word, for revealing yourself to us. Lord, thank you for giving us a way to be made seen as perfect. And that only way is through believing in your Son, through having faith in your Son. By believing that his death and his shed blood covers my sins. If I fully believe that and fully trust that, then I'm part of your family. And so, Lord, I want to believe that today. I want to put my faith in you today. I want to confess that you are Lord, and I believe in my heart that you raised Jesus from the dead so that now I can inherit eternal life. I want to live for you today. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer for the first time, there should be a number that's on the screen, and we would love to chat more. If you text that number, one of our elders will reach out to you, and we'd love to pray with you and continue to walk with you. But if you prayed that for the first time, then you are part of the family of God, and you can have assurance that you will spend eternity with him. Here's what I want to do. I want to give our key takeaway and our action step. Our key takeaway is this: the God of the universe became one of us so that we could live for him. The God of the universe became one of us, and that's the only way that we can live for him. And then here's our action step. Our action step is twofold. Number one, and this is about to be for you in your group, to answer the discussion questions. The discussion questions can be found in the description of this video or on our website. And whether you are with a group or even if you're watching alone, I want to encourage you to look at these discussion questions as a way to go deeper into the message from today. And then the second part of our action step is to pray about joining a home group at the Corners Chapel. If you're not already part of a home group, I want to challenge you to pray about joining one. I told you I'd explain why we made the shift from small groups to home groups. Well, the reality is we have many kinds of groups that could all be characterized as small groups. In fact, on the screen, you should see a chart of our discipleship communities and the different pillars. We have our home groups, we have our Bible studies, we have short-term groups, and we're going to be launching a new specific focused group, life stage group. And so more information on that in the new year. So spoiler alert, I won't tell you what it is. You can email Doug and Debbie Fury, or you can go on our website and you can read about each group or how to get plugged in. So again, those are our two action steps. Check out the discussion questions and pray about joining a home group if you're not already in one. And so with all of that said, let me just thank you again for tuning into this week's Home Group Sunday. And we will see you next week, Lord willing, at the Nordonia High School. Be blessed.
Thank you.